Down to the brass tacks here. The person that controls what goes on the floor is the speaker. Will you make a commitment to support a different speaker in the House for Republicans in January?
Okay.
Is the question clear?
Yes.
Okay. For our audience, basically, the commitment is, we're asking the candidates, who would they support for Speaker of the House? This round of questions starts with Mr. Melendez, then we go to Mr. Oxner, Mr. Nieves, and Mr. Long.
I mentioned this at another congressional debate. I'm a wholehearted supporter of Representative Darrell Issa from California. He was the one that's holding Eric Holder in contempt of contempt of Congress, wanting them to release all the documents, because that's something that doesn't make sense. There are secret hearings within the congressional delegation. For instance, if you're in the CIA and you don't want to give up your leaks, you can still release all your documents in that proper setting. So he's somebody that still holds true to his principles and his values. And one of my issues with Speaker Boehner is, at the time, there was going to be an opportunity for us to have an actual balanced budget amendment passed as a constitutional amendment, or at least passed through the House. And unfortunately, all it took was one day to allow us to go into shutting down the government, for instance. You know, because they did the polls, and they showed that even Democrats support a balanced budget. All they had to do was wait one day. Because look at Speaker Gingrich. He didn't just shut down the government once, he shut it down twice. And we're able to get a balanced budget, and they had an economic recovery that followed. And so that's something that I want as a leader who's going to stand up for what's right, even if it's not popular. And I'm a huge fan of Representative Issa, or if someone else steps up to the plate, I'm looking for some true leadership in the conservative union.
Thank you, Mr. Oxner.
Yeah, I wouldn't support John Boehner. John Boehner doesn't support me. He's made it clear to a few people, him and Pete Sessions, that I'm not his favorite choice to win this primary, which makes me feel good because he's not my favorite choice as Speaker. I like Representative Issa. I also like Representative Paul Ryan. We need people with fresh ideas. We need people that are willing to fight. So those would be the two that I would really like. Michelle Bachmann is also one that I would like. So there's three that I would support. I would not support John Boehner.
Thank you. To the point, Mr. Nieves.
I can't give you a name as to who I would support specifically. However, I can tell you that I would look for the traits, the personal skills, the diplomatic approach of the likes of a Henry Kissinger, perhaps. Our nation, our Congress, is totally divided. We have reached a level of despotism. And if we go back to our Constitution, it tells us what our duty is. And we've reached that time. I believe that our founding fathers took care of the violence involved with overthrowing a government. I do believe that they also had the wisdom to put independent party as a way in which to make a change in our nation's capital. So I look at that position as a true leadership position, a position that could put party affiliation aside and really focus on country. We need that type of leadership. We never needed it more than today.
Thank you, Mr. Long.
I would definitely oppose John Boehner. And, you know, we know one thing, I fight against the Republican establishment. I've been doing it because they've abandoned the conservative values that made this country so great. And what was really disheartening was John Boehner promised, yeah, we were out of control 2001 to 2006, but give us another chance, give us another chance. I'm going to make sure we cut government spending. What happened? 2010, most everybody in this room fought hard for the Republican candidates. They went to D.C., said it's broken, they're bankrupting the country, we all agreed. And then President Obama asked to raise the deficit another $2 trillion. They had a good plan in place called cut, cap, and balance to at least put us in the right direction. And then they just folded like a tent and gave President Obama $2 trillion more to increase funding in the Department of Education, more welfare programs, National Endowment of Arts, on and on and on and on and on. And we got nothing for it. The House of Representatives completely controls the purse strings of this country and could have stopped this. They should have shut down the government. The government needs to be shut down and only resurrected the very small part of it that needs to be resurrected. So I'm totally against him. I'll fight passionately for Paul Ryan, a thoughtful conservative, Michelle Bachmann, somebody that's got ideas, solutions based on our founders' principles. But I was just outraged what the Republican Congress did when the time came to show us that they've truly learned their lesson and get back to limited government. They abandoned us once again and gave Obama another $2 trillion to bankrupt our kids, which I find inexcusable and unconscionable.
Thank you. Do I have a question on my left from the audience? State your name, please.
My name is Hobie Fisher. Ladies, thank you for having this debate. Gentlemen, thank you for coming to our community. We really appreciate that. We know you care. Thank you for serving. I'm past president of Avalon Lakes Homeowners Association, and I've been involved with a lot of community projects, and this is more of a local state issue, but we need your help. I worked with Mayor Crotty some time ago and became the chairman of the Citizens Advisory Committee for the toll road. As you know, our whole community is held hostage to a toll road. Osceola County, our county, East Orlando particularly. We have very good roads. We pay for those roads. However, the question for you is, now we're challenged to pay for the parkway that's going around the northern part of the city. That means that's taxation without representation. We're also being taxed to pay for a railroad that's going to go through our town. I'm not opposed to these items. However, I'm opposed to Orange County and Osceola paying for these items. Our community leadership, as far as the toll road, is way out of bounds. I actually worked with the Blue Ribbon Committee. I was given full access to that.
Please state your question.
My question is, how can you help us once you're in Washington? We desperately need help with our roads. Thank you.
Thank you. This question, the round starts with Mr. Nieves, then Mr. Melendez, Mr. Long, and Mr. Oxner. Mr. Nieves.
Well, investments in interstates should not all be handled or fall under the local communities. In Central Florida, we have the tourist industry, and we do very well with that. A lot of the cars that come into our communities are out of state, and has an effect on our roads. Yet you don't see any tourist dollars going to roads, do you? So there's a way to skin a cat, and what I would tell you is I would look at ways in which to figure out why is it that we've been paying 10 cents, or started at 10 cents at the toll at the airport back in '77, and that road's still not paid for. Doesn't make any sense to me.
Thank you. Mr. Melendez.
Well, I happened to speak with Congressman Micah the other night in Orange County. Well, when we collect, gas monies, and the federal government has they call it an enterprise fund. The money you collect is the money that you spend on infrastructure. So I just have a problem when we overspend that. When we take money from general revenue, which is basically deficit spending, for that infrastructure, what we need to do is create a funding formula within the enterprise fund. So we shouldn't be taking general revenue dollars for that. We have specific monies dedicated from the federal government to allocate for that. We should be building bridges to nowhere. We should be identifying where are high population target areas that need some relief. And one issue that I have with Sunrail, it's kind of the opposite of the Magic Arena. The government, when the arena is not in play, the government owns it for the rest of the time and they can make more money off it. Sunrail is the completely opposite. They still own the tracks. And they, not only do they own the tracks, but they actually own it during the day too. So at a certain time, I believe the cutoff is like 8 o'clock at night, you can't even use it. They're going to use it as freight. And so it's a completely bad deal for Sunrail. And I kind of believe what he said. If Sunrail is going to be used, it's probably used more by tourists than it is an average person, because I'm not giving up my car. So the tourist development dollars should have paid for it. But I just think that it's a bad deal for Sunrail. In Osceola County, not all of us even have access to it because it only goes through the I-4 corridor. If you live in UCF, how are you going to get from UCF to the actual train? It makes no sense. And then on top of that, there's no dedicated funding source for it after it's built, because after 7 years, the state's not going to contribute. So what taxes are we going to have to increase in order to do that? So I do believe in mass transit, but the way this CSX deal was created, it just stinks in every which way I look at it.
Thank you. Mr. Long, before we continue on, I'm going to come back around to this issue because I think what the gentleman is looking for is specific information from you as our elected representative in Washington, D.C., and you control the purse strings. Would you support, co-sponsor a bill to somehow fix this issue? I think that's where we're headed with this. Mr. Long.
probably know where I'm headed. I mean, the federal government does have a role to play in interstate highways, obviously, because one state can't do it. But anything locally within a state, it doesn't. The federal government, as we know, doesn't have any money. We're $16 trillion in debt and just completely crushing this nation. So as a practical matter, I will also say this, you're going to, I think, want your representative. There's a number of incredibly difficult challenges, and I think you're going to want your congressman to be focused in on those. But I will say this, at any time you're in a place of position of leadership, the concerns of the community and the people, whether they're local or not, are also your concerns. And you should be educated about that, spend time with your people, talk to the other local officials that actually make those decisions, and give your advice and input or help educate the public on any matter that involves them. So I think there's a role to play sort of as a leader to be caring about those issues. But I do think that your representative really needs to focus his time, energy, and passion on finding some solutions to these national challenges, which is probably what I'm going to be doing the vast majority of my time.
Okay. Mr. Oxner?
Sunrail, I think, is going to cost $1 billion to implement. Now, I don't want to say anything bad because he's not here, but my opponent here, Mr. Quiones, is a big supporter of the Sunrail, and it'll probably be as successful as the Amtrak system. We need to quit wasting money, and we have big government Republicans, just like we have big government Democrats, that are wasting our money. And one of the things that I promised to do when I get to Congress is, I'm going to fight in Congress, but I plan to come back here and fight on the district. I plan to fight against the Osceola County Commission. I plan to fight against the Orange County Commission. I plan to fight against the Osceola School Board. I plan to fight against the Orange County School Board. There's things that right now, if I go out there and I fight against the school board, I'm one guy without any kids in that school. They're not going to listen to me. But when I represent 700,000 people, you better believe that the school board and the counties are going to have somebody to deal with. And I will fight for you at the public level, at the national level, and I will fight for you here locally.
Okay, I'm going to give each of you about 30 more seconds to kind of flesh out your thoughts about your role as a U.S. representative in this area. The Constitution specifically gives Congress a role to play in interstate commerce. And the gentleman's question is about a problem that truly is local to our citizens here and impacts our pocketbooks here in these counties. So from a congressional standpoint, what could you do to alleviate that problem? And we'll start with Mr. Nieves.
Well, again, I feel that problem starts with your local elected officials and how they
I'm going to interrupt you right there. The problem is already there. So if you're going to be in Congress and our local representatives have already said, we're going to spend money that we don't have. We're going to take money from our neighbors in Alaska to spend money here on a project that citizens here probably won't use. What would you do?
Well, I guess I would start in that sense. I would start with seeking funding so that we can try to manage traffic in Orlando in a better way than we do. Starting with, I'll give you an example. You go to Miami, you go to New York, you go to LA. Cities manage their traffic. You have rush hours in the morning, you have rush hours at night, you got dedicated lanes, and we don't do anything like that here. I'm not sure. You got semis going down I-4, going up and down embankments, a curve that you have an accident, truck accident just about every month. Perhaps I could look at some safety issues to address funding for some of these roads. But I guess Todd mentioned best. You got to get in the community. You got to talk to your constituents. You got to find out what the issues are and take that ammunition and go to Washington and address those issues.
Okay, Mr. Melendez.
You have to be very careful because that's where the earmarks come into play. That's how we want to make you happy. I'll build your road here. It's kind of like what I said initially in my answer. There has to be a funding formula that makes sense within the enterprise fund, within the transportation trust fund. We cannot overspend. As much as I would like to make you happy and win your vote over by building you a bridge or building you a road, I think that's what got us into the financial mess that we're in right now. We do not have any money. And that's the burden that's going to come from the states and the county governments to help fund that road. And again, the federal government can fund money for transportation. We have it, but we have to live within our means. I'm not going to earmark something because my community wants wants it or they're going to vote for me. I'm not going to be held hostage to the principles of a balanced budget.
Time. Mr. Long. Mr. Long.
It's not just that earmarks are corrupt and bad policies, but they're unconstitutional. The Constitution doesn't say that Congress can tax and spend for any reason it wants. It said it can only spend for certain enumerated items, and then there was the general welfare of the United States. Clearly all these local